following program is intended for mature audiences.
Welcome to Rudy's Revelation. Finding revelation in the news and meaning in media. Sunday, January 24th, 2020. Today I'll be talking back to the Sunday Talking Heads on CBS Face the Nation, where Dr. Anthony Fauci, President Joe Biden's chief medical advisor, says the U.S. must reach the goal of administering 100 million shots by April. Also be checking in on Sunday morning propaganda at our favorite feel-good feature news program, CBS Sunday Morning, where senior contributor Ted Koppel also talks to Dr. Anthony Fauci, who says claims that the pandemic narrative is a hoax have thwarted America's effort to limit the coronavirus's toll. We'll also be tearing into the Sunday New York Times, showing how the newspaper continually mischaracterizes the facts to mislead the public. And of course, I'll be going over the weekend headlines all in the next 30 minutes. First, I'll be taking you back to school, giving you some historical context to frame this week's news narratives. The word of the day is disingenuous.
Lacking in frankness, candor, or sincerity, falsely or hypocritically ingenuous, insincere.
Now, the reason the word of the day is disingenuous is obviously because of Biden's disingenuous call for unity. This is from Gingrich 360. Joe Biden and his defenders would like you to think that he's the man to bring Americans together, the moderate savior who is willing to unify us. But there is a problem. It's clear that Biden, his team, Democrats in Congress, left-wing activists in the streets, and anti-Trump elites on both sides of the political aisle aren't really interested in unity. Fox anchor Bret Baier hits disingenuous media coverage of Harris as skilled campaigner. In the primary, she didn't make it to Christmas. Also, disingenuous or disingenuity is also referred to in spin, otherwise known as propaganda. Disingenuous media tries to silence Feel the Burn movement. They failed. This is from 2016. Groups press from the Hill, groups press Facebook to stop disingenuous advocacy in India. From Red State, irony, NBC News disingenuous propaganda piece deems 64-page Biden report disinformation. From United We Stand, Kamala Harris slammed after disingenuous tweet. From Tech Dirt, Sheryl Sandberg makes disingenuous push to argue that only Facebook has the power to stop bad people online. And from Newsmax, Megyn Kelly to Newsmax, Biden's call for unity disingenuous. And from Reason, most politicians are disingenuous opportunists. The coronavirus outbreak only makes that more obvious.
Less than 3% of you people read books.
And the reading recommendation of the day is The Clowning of America, Woke Capital, Con Inc., and Meme Culture by Orwell Good. The description reads, why is America's political cultural landscape in its current condition? The book offers a tongue-in-cheek outsider's perspective to the current unraveling intentions as we enter another election cycle. As riots, peaceful protests, and lockdowns, phony scandals to escalating civil unrest dominate much of the news cycle. The media's complicity in driving crucial narratives, as well as Western governments' impotent anarchy tyranny, have become apparent. Outrage mobs and witch hunts on social media seek to ruin people's lives for the sake of ideological conformity and wielding social power. Megacorporations are at the helm when driving such recent social change. 100 years ago, revolutionaries were draped in red flags when leading their charge. Now, HR and marketing departments slap a cheap rainbow filter on their brand's logo and now and then on their social media pages. Branding has adopted its own form to push a silent online revolution, but it has also assumed the role of identity. Both socioeconomic status and subcultural affiliation have been subsumed by branding. This is a look at disingenuity of American culture, the clowning of America, woke capital, con Inc., and meme culture by Orwell Good. From AFP, Google suspends second AI ethics researcher. From The Hill, Comey Republican Party has to be burned to the ground. Just move on. From AP, Republicans grapple with post-Trump future. From Information Liberation, QAnon bears striking resemblance to Bolshevik PSYOP from the 1920s known as Operation Trust. Everybody should look into this. Operation Trust was a Bolshevik counterintelligence operation run from 1921 to 1926 aimed at neutralizing opposition by creating the false impression that a powerful group of military leaders had organized to stop the communist takeover. From Zero Hedge, right on cue for Biden, WHO admits high cycle PCR tests produce COVID false positives. From Breaking 911, MIT professor indicted for hiding his ties to China. From Newsweek, 3 in 4 Republicans don't think Joe Biden won election legitimately. From the New York Post, 23 die in Norway after receiving Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine. Of course, Snopes questions this claim. 23 people in Norway die after receiving COVID vaccine. A death following a vaccination is not necessarily evidence that the vaccination caused the death. But they go into this whole diatribe, and it's unproven. Well, apparently these elderly people received the vaccine, and then they all died about a week later. So you can draw your own conclusion from that. From the Wall Street Journal, Trump pressed Justice Department to go directly to Supreme Court to overturn election results. The former president dropped the efforts to replace the acting attorney general after top DOJ officials agreed to resign en masse in protest if he succeeded. People familiar said. Capitol attack will spur broad crackdown on domestic extremists. This is from the Washington Post. The storming of the Capitol on January 6 crystallized for national security officials that violent extremism is not a threat exclusively imported from foreign shores. It is made in America. From the New York Post, Californian dies hours after getting COVID-19 vaccine, prompting probe. From AP, Dutch police clash with anti-lockdown protesters in 2 cities. From the Washington Post again, Justice Department, FBI debate not charging some of the Capitol rioters. Federal law enforcement officials are privately debating whether they should decline to charge some of the individuals who stormed the U.S. Capitol this month, a politically loaded proposition, but one alert to the practical concern that hundreds of such cases could swamp the local courthouse. Basically, they charge a lot of people with trespassing. Most of the people that entered the Capitol were just trespassers. There are only a few people that caused damage. So the two real charges are trespassing and vandalism. So I wouldn't really call that an insurrection. And most of the people that did vandalism were Antifa or suspected Antifa. They weren't, and they didn't look anything like your normal Trump supporters that you would see at other rallies. From the Gateway Pundit, accurate list of 2020 election fraud cases shows 81 cases total, 30 still active, and not one single court has allowed evidence to be argued. That's what they say. They say, oh, all the courts rejected the allegations, baseless, as the media would refer to them, baseless allegations of fraud. Nobody agreed to listen to the case. So that means they didn't look at the evidence. From MSN, this is from the London Independent, COVID, new strain, variant or mutation? What's the difference? Now what they're doing is they're calling the new mutations of the virus a variant, just to confuse people. Viruses mutate, and usually as they mutate, they get weaker. And that's going to be one indication that it's a engineered virus, is the fact that it's going to mutate and get stronger. And from the New York Times, Fauci on what working for Trump was really like. Now, we're going to hear a lot from Fauci today because of his new beatification under Biden. This is from AP, my pillow guy among the Trump acolytes picking up the torch. So apparently, Mike Lindell, the guy who manufactures My Pillow, and if you've ever read his book, you should read his book. It's interesting. He's a really smart guy, a card counter, a gambler, but he had a bad drug problem, and he came to Jesus and started My Pillow, and now he's extremely wealthy. But he might be running for governor. So anybody out there with extra money to throw, you could throw at his campaign. Newsmax, Rand Paul insists great deal of evidence of election fraud. Now, we all love Rand Paul. He declared, great deal of evidence of election fraud and illegal election law changes that merit a thorough investigation. In a contentious exchange on ABC News this week with George Stephanopoulos, Paul said liberal journalists are calling anybody that believes the election was stolen is a fool to bring up the subject. Quote, there are two sides to every story, George. You're forgetting who you are. You're forgetting who you are as a journalist if you think there's only one side. And that's what I talk about, mischaracterization. All they do is mischaracterize the facts by labeling them baseless or what have you. This is from the London Independent. Robot brain chip unleashes physical potential of machines. From Reuters, Chinese authorizes Coast Guard to fire on foreign vessels if needed. Now, China is getting their hackles up because they know there's no opposition to them right now because Joe Biden is bought and paid for. So you will see China passed a law on Friday that for the first time explicitly allows its Coast Guard to fire on foreign vessels, a move that could make the contested waters around China more choppy. Now that Joe Biden is in office, who is bought and paid for by the Chinese, you will see more military aggression and forceful behavior from the Chinese military because there's no one really there to stop them. From Reuters, Taiwan reports second day of incursions by Chinese Air Force. And there you go. A total of 15 Chinese aircraft, including 12 fighter jets, entered the southwestern corner of Taiwan's air defense identification zone on Sunday, the island's defense ministry said. And this is an interesting story. The San Gabriel Valley Tribune bomb thrown into El Monte Church criticized for extremist views on gay people. So the bomb wasn't thrown by an extremist. The church is extremist. Did you catch that? From the Journalism Post, 17-year-old in ICU after receiving second coronavirus vaccine dose. Now, if most of you don't know, Israel is putting forth an effort to vaccinate everyone of every age except for young children. So even teenagers are getting vaccinated, and here you're seeing more problems with. And obviously, with the amount of people getting vaccinated, you're going to see problems because a certain amount of people get adverse reactions, and you're going to have deaths and so on. And the fact that they're putting this under the table is disingenuous. So we're going to go ahead and tear into the New York Times. In Biden's Catholic faith, an ascendant liberal Christianity. So now they're trying to play both sides, even though the left is full of heathens and pagans, atheists, and so forth, that look at people with faith as being rubes and being foolish. They're trying to ascend a liberal Christianity when most people on the left don't believe in God. There's some moderate liberals that Biden is supposed to be that are religious, that are Christians, and they go to church and whatnot. But the majority of people on the left are atheists. So this is a big feign to try to lure some religious people or people of faith to come over to the left and support the left, which is the left is against liberty, religious liberty and otherwise. Pro-Navalny protests sweep Russia in challenge to Putin. Here we go. Here's another color revolution. The pro-Navalny protests are very similar to what happened after George Floyd. It's the same playbook. The protests move across time zones, and more than 3,000 people were arrested in at least 109 cities, signaling widespread fatigue with the corruption-plagued political order presided over by President Vladimir Putin. This is all engineered by intelligence agencies, the same way they did the Arab Spring, the same way they did the Black Lives Matter protests. It's the same playbook. If people want to look at the color revolutions that really set the template for this, you can go ahead and do so. There's a catalyst event that brings discontent to critical mass, and protests are then organized using, guess what? Social media, the Center for Nonviolent Conflict. So people should look that up, and that group and Twitter conspired to bring about the Arab Spring. So same deal here. Can Robert Bigelow and the rest of us survive death? He is offering nearly $1 million if you help him figure it out. Okay, here is another wealthy individual, Thomas Bigelow, Robert Bigelow. He's now offering $1 million in prizes for the best evidence for the survival of consciousness after permanent bodily death. He's another rich individual who wants to cheat death and cheat the judgment. And that's what it's about, is the rich people who are evil want to cheat judgment by cheating death. And here's the most important New York Times article that we're going to dive in here today. Inside the deadly Capitol shooting, with a mob approaching, police lieutenant fatally shot a woman trying to vault through the window near the House chamber. Now, if you're watching on video, you can see that these are young people dressed in black bloc, most of them, that are causing the violence. Okay? And you see two security officers standing to the side, allowing the people to break the windows. Now, what this article is about is basically, it's in defense of the Capitol Police lieutenant who shot and killed Ashley Babbitt. Now, they haven't named the Capitol Police officer, but let me tell you something. This was in the Speaker's lobby. So nobody even mentions Nancy Pelosi, but it was near Nancy Pelosi's office. And I believe even that the police lieutenant, the person who shot Ashley Babbitt, was part of Nancy Pelosi's security. Now, that is yet to be confirmed, but that was right near her office. It was near her. It was the speaker's lobby. So what I want to just go into really quickly is the fact that they were allowed to do this. And the fact is that one BLM/Antifa member who was filmed the officer or the security person pointing the gun at the doorway, but did not inform Ashley Babbitt and the person that was helping her through the window, through the broken window, was not helping her by informing her that there was someone pointing a gun, because it wasn't done very quickly. You could see if you look at the video that the guy was pointing the gun there for 5 minutes as he was being filmed, and the guy who was filming it didn't warn her and say, hey, don't climb through the window. There's security right there pointing a handgun at the door. Now, if she knew that, she probably never would have, I don't know who would, climb through illegally, trespass, while someone's pointing a gun. So no one warned her. Why? Because they wanted her to go through and get shot. And this was specifically filmed. So the guy that was a BLM Antifa member knew the security was pointing a gun and didn't warn Ashley Babbitt not to climb through the window. And she ended up getting shot and killed. So we always end up here in the Sunday Review, which is the best or the worst, depending on how you look at it, of the editorial and opinion pieces from the New York Times. And the two we want to concentrate on is, of course, Jamel Bowie again. We have to make the Republican Party less dangerous. The crisis Trump set in motion is far from over. In his inaugural address on Wednesday, Joe Biden said that after 4 years of Trumpian chaos, including 2 months of thrashing against the results of the election, culminating in the attack of the Capitol itself, democracy has prevailed. But it might have been better, if appropriate to the moment, for the president to have said democracy had survived. Nothing Trump did was anti-democratic. Does everybody know that the democratic process is basically the vote? Everybody gets to cast a ballot. That's what democracy is. The next opinion piece by Colin P. Clark is director at an intelligence and security consultancy and the author of After the Caliphate, the Islamic State and the Future of the Terrorist Diaspora. A new era of far-right violence, the imagery of Capitol siege, now it's a siege, insurrection and a siege, have enduring resonance. And the New York Times will always get a picture from the Trump rally. And they were like, I could have counted, out of the 100,000 people or whatever, there were like 3 Confederate flags. And they always make sure they use an image with a Confederate flag on there. Most of the flags were American flags. Most of the flags were Trump flags. You've seen the rallies before, so you know what it looks like. So Colin goes on with his lead, the storming of the Capitol on January 6th by a rabid mob. Do you see what I mean by mischaracterization? Rabid mob. I mean, this is an opinion piece. I guess you can write whatever you want, but the mob wasn't rabid. Donald Trump supporters resulted in a failed insurrection, but for far-right extremists, including anti-government militias, white supremacists, and violent conspiracy theorists, is there any evidence that conspiracy theorists are violent? There isn't any. Nothing about the insurrection was a failure. So then he links in Ruby Ridge in Idaho, where a guy was set up by the FBI who then went to his house in Idaho and shot his wife. And we all know what happened in Waco, Texas. You know, I'm not sticking up for Weaver or the Branch Davidians or anything. And the Oklahoma City bombing, which was a false flag. If anybody wants to look in the evidence, in the first two incidents, federal agents raided compounds to arrest armed domestic extremists. How was Randy Weaver a domestic extreme? And they label people as extremists that haven't committed any violence. And then they commit violence on them. The reason, and first of all, the reason they went into the Waco compound is that there were reports of child abuse. It wasn't because they were armed domestic extremists. And then he says, similarly, the siege of the Capitol will be framed as a successful demonstration, proof of concept. And then they talk about on Telegram, white supremacists brazenly trade tips on how to recruit MAGA adherents who abandon mainstream sites like Twitter in search of more extreme content. Again, this is all disingenuous. There are no far-right extremists. There are people that are on the conservative side. Why are people that are always right of center far-right? And they're not far-right. They're people on the right. And what they're doing is they're trying to uphold individual liberties as a hedge, and the Constitution as a hedge against the mob of the democratic process, majority rule. So then we're going to go right on to our talking heads, and we're going to start out. We got two pieces on Fauci. The first one was with Maggie Brennan on Face the Nation, where he talks about, again, this week, about genetic surveillance. Now remember that term, genetic surveillance. It's coming.
B1351. We need to expand greatly our genomic surveillance.
The administration says in its new plan it wants to increase surveillance and sequencing of viruses.
Down the pike, down the line, we may need to modify and upgrade the vaccine. The best way to prevent the further evolution of these mutants is to vaccinate as many people as possible with the vaccines that we have currently available to us.
B1351.
The Biden administration says in its new plan it wants to increase surveillance and sequencing of viruses.
Increase surveillance and sequencing of viruses. B1351.
The South African strain, B1351.
We need to expand greatly our genomic surveillance, dramatically increase what we call genomic surveillance. 100 million shots in the arms of people within 100 days. It's 100 million shots in the arms of people within the first 100 days. We've got to vaccinate as many people as we possibly can, as quickly as we possibly can.
Absolutely. The South African strain. Biden administration says in its new plan it wants to increase surveillance and sequencing of viruses. Do you think there needs to be a 9/11 type commission to look at what went wrong?
We really do. I mean, whether you want to call it a 9/11 commission, but we really need to look into some of the deficiencies in our healthcare systems.
Biden administration says in its new plan it wants to increase surveillance.
And there you go, genetic surveillance. So what they're going to do is they're going to start making testing mandatory, which of course is unconstitutional, but they'll sell it first on, we're looking for the dangerous strains. So we need to take your blood. We need to take a swab. And what they do is they take genetic material from you and build a genetic database. So let's go on to Sunday morning propaganda from CBS Sunday Morning, again, with Ted Koppel and Saint Fauci.
Say no to the prick. Coffee mugs or suggestions of impending sainthood. Say no to the prick.
I believe Dr. Fauci has manufactured the coronaviruses.
We've had a complete distortion and throwing aside of scientific facts and evidence. And at a certain part of the country believed the hoax. I became a symbol that was unrealistic, like St. Anthony. That's not reality. A situation where we were talking about hydroxychloroquine.
It may work, may not work. I feel good about it. That's all it is, just a feeling. I'm a smart guy.
And he was up there talking about it, and I think I went like.
I'd like him to go back to the State Department, or as they call it, the Deep State Department. You don't mind?
I instinctively did, and I just sort of was saying to myself, oh my God.
President Trump. He can actually be an extraordinarily charming man.
And he's got this high approval rating, so why don't I have a high approval rating with respect, and the administration, with respect to the virus?
And then we had that famous time when people were chanting, fire Fauci, and he said, well, that's not a bad idea. I think I'll do that.
Don't tell anybody, but let me wait till a little bit after the election. No, he's been wrong on a lot.
At the age of 80, he has just taken on a new title.
St. Anthony.
Working for Joe Biden. Say no to the prick. We've had 4 years, Tony, of from the top, undermining confidence in all of our institutions. Intelligence, the FBI, the media, science. Say no to the prick. Say no to the prick.
St. Anthony.
All right, that's it for us. We'll see you next week. Check us out, Rudy's Revelation, Twitter, on Facebook.